Recording's in
go.
progress.
I am glad I'm wrong. Great.
Thank you for bringing that up, though. Thank
Okay,
you very
I
much.
think it'll help us because we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yep.
And so it would be helpful to have this. Okay, continue, please.
All right. Woo. So, PowerPoint slideshow and share. Okay, so the context of planning the Vermont planning landscape. Vermont's a Dillon's rule state, which runs counter to what most people think, which is, oh, Vermont must be home rule. No, it's not. You can only do those things. Towns can only do those things that they're enabled to do by statute. And if you want to do those things, you have to do them as specified in the statute. And the statute we're referring to is called many things, but the Municipal and Regional Planning and Development Act, or for short, the Planning and Development Act. And it's Title 24, Chapter 117, Sections 4301 to 4498. You can access that on the legislature's website, if you don't know that. And sorry to be pedantic, but I will frequently refer to the statute when people have questions, because you want to make sure you're doing what the statute says you can and should be doing. So there are 3 essential elements for land use planning. The statute that we just cited, which authorizes town plans and also implementation tools. Municipal plans are authorized by the statute with required components, and we'll get into that, but there's essentially 12 required elements. And if you have a plan, you don't have to, it has to be consistent with the state's planning goals. And then there are the implementation tools provided for in statute, regulatory zoning and subdivision bylaws and so on, and then non-regulatory. And we'll visit those details a little bit. A very brief history, and we don't have to spend much time on this slide, but planning commissions were first authorized in Vermont in 1921, and zoning in 31, and then Chapter 117 in 68, and then Act 200 updated that in 88, and then there were some more revisions, particularly pertaining to zoning in 2004. So what is a municipal plan, which is the term of art in the statute, and why have one? What it is, a document that articulates the vision of the town for and by the town, and provides guidance for achieving those aspirations. Various, and so it can provide recommendations for what the town could and should do and how to go about it. It should be an inclusive process developing the town vision, and it empowers having a plan empowers the town to respond to change in ways that reflect the town's goals and needs, priorities and values. And they provide a means to designate areas for conservation and development, and designate areas that you want to maintain as is or to change slowly or more rapidly. With a current plan, you can adopt and amend zoning, subdivision, and flood hazard area land use regulations. If you don't have a town plan, you cannot adopt or amend those regulations. You have to have a current town plan to be able to amend your zoning. So one of Annie's questions leading up to this was about the relationship between plan and zoning, so one thing to bear in mind is that with your town plan expiration date coming up, and the fact that it takes a long time to do a thorough town plan update, there's a lot of procedural stuff involved, hearings with advance notice and so on and so forth. So you want to keep that in mind as a focus, a focal point as we go forward. Act 250 permits can only issue with a finding that a proposed project conforms with the town plan. So if you're concerned about things, you want to address them in your town plan in very clear language so that the District Environmental Commission or the Environmental Court, if it gets to there, can tell what it is the town wants to do with a fair amount of specificity. In section 248 proceedings, petitions to the Public Utility Commission, I think their name is now, it changes over time. Town plans are given due consideration, or if you have an enhanced municipal energy plan contained within your town plan, you may be able to achieve substantial deference in the section 248 proceedings. And that hasn't been tested in court case yet, but the sort of definition is that the town plan shall prevail unless, and the Public Utility Commission always keeps this get out of jail free card in their pocket, unless the commission determines that the greater good of the state, region, community, the greater good of the greater number requires overriding the town plan. So that has not been tried in court yet, but and having a town plan helps the town meet eligibility requirements for grants such as municipal planning grants, among others. Also bylaw modernization grants, which is a topic we can discuss in the future, and helps create more competitive applications. I think there's more weeds to go in terms of eligibility for grants and stuff, but I think we come to another slide that deals with that more. So overall planning process, you can start at any point in this loop, but start at adopt the plan. Then you go and implement the plan, and while it's being implemented, you evaluate it and the planning program and collect and analyze background information, establish goals and objectives, outline policies and actions, create an implementation program, and then you have a plan, and then you adopt it and implement it and go around the cycle again. Plans, I think we'll get into this, but plans can be amended or updated at any point in the process. Plans are generally good for 8 years from the date of adoption. It used to be 5, but it has been increased to 8 years. Anyway, so planning process and substantive goals. The state has in section 4302 of 24 VSA, they lay out 4 planning process goals, and I'm not going to read them to you, but they're established coordinated planning process, encourage citizen participation, consider use of resources and consequences of development, and encourage and assist municipalities working together. More critical to the town plan is the 14 substantive planning goals with which a town plan must be consistent. And there's a definition of consistent in the statute, but essentially it means that that implementing the town plan will lead towards attainment of these goals. And They include things like the land use pattern of compact villages surrounded by rural countryside and creating a strong and diverse economy. And I'm not going to go through and read each and every one of them. But those can be found laid out in section 4302. Multiple forms of citizen participation. And I won't take credit for this slide, but it does sort of cover the gamut of ways to help induce, I guess, incite citizen participation in the planning process. So inform the public as best you can, and consult with them. That can often happen in public meetings. And actually, if there were a silver lining to the recent pandemic situation, it was the massive increase in virtual meetings and people able to participate without having to drive places or commit to a great amount of time when they have other things on their plate. So there can be opportunities for dialogue and interaction and collaborate with the public in decision making. Sometimes this goes quite above and beyond what smaller towns in Vermont want or are capable of doing, but these are examples. I mean, I think Weston's in great shape with the planning commission that it currently has, but I don't know that you'll be able to create a bunch of citizen advisory committees. So just reality check. So here are the actual 12 required elements specified in the statute. And we have a town plan self-assessment form, which I'd be happy to share with you, that leads you through all of these things, your consideration of these in your town plan. It seems a little odd in that you have for example, number 7, recommended program for implementation of the objectives, which you might have thought would logically come at the end of the required elements. But this is a result of the legislature adding stuff on over time. So it used to be that it just stopped at number 7, but then they thought, oh yeah, we ought to add compatibility with other plans, and then energy plan, that was added, then housing element, then economic development element, and finally flood resilience plan. And so as they added new stuff, that just got tacked on the end. Yes, Ann?
John, I'm with number 9. Is that an does that mean the energy plan itself is an option for?
No, and thank you for asking that. An energy plan is a required element of a town plan, and actually it's what it has to contain is actually laid out in some detail in 4382, but there is an option for an Act 174 compliant enhanced energy plan. That's one that meets standards promulgated by the Department of Public Service. And if you meet those standards, that's when your plan can achieve substantial deference as opposed to due consideration in section 248 proceedings. There's a lot of background information available, and we've helped a number of towns develop the enhanced energy plan. You don't have to do an enhanced one, but many towns want to because they want to try to achieve that substantial deference in section 248 proceedings. Some towns don't want wind. Other towns do want commercial wind on their ridge lines or neighboring ridge lines. So that's one of the reasons so that's an option the enhanced one, but there is a requirement for a basic one as part of the town plan.
Hey, John,
Yep.
John, there's a lot of, Weston touches a lot of other towns. We have a number of adjacent towns.
Yep.
So how do we, what do you recommend as far as trying to achieve compatibility with both these adjacent towns and other regional plans?
Well, sort of, there's a, if you will, the sort of common sense or reality nuts and bolts basis is take a look at your neighboring town plans, take a look at the regional plan, and sort of shorthand ways, take a look at the proposed land use plan or future land use plan of each and see how well they match up. And the compatibility, there's a definition of that in statute, believe it or not. Actually, I'm sure you can believe it. And if not now, you will soon. But basically, compatibility it means that the implementation of one town plan will not substantially hinder or somehow interfere with the implementation of the other plan under consideration. So you don't have to have the exact same districts matching at the town line, but what you implement on your side of the line shouldn't hinder what Londonderry is trying to do on their side of the town line. And what you're proposing in your town plan should not run completely counter to what's in the regional plan for proposed land use. There's a lot of room for conversation about that. And towns can say, we don't match up and we are going to work with our adjacent town on trying to address that problem. So does that sort of answer the question? All righty.
John,
Yep.
if I can ask before you move on, you
Yeah.
said there is a town plan assessment form.
Yep.
Does that assess the completeness of the town plan against the state statute?
Yes.
Does that assess the plan in its relevance to the time in which you're evaluating the plan?
I think the short answer, Jeff, is yes. Sort of to both. What it is, it's a form that WRC created. It's called the Town Plan Self-Assessment Form. And it basically lists all the required elements and their contents, and then ask you to evaluate or to document for yourselves where in your plan you actually address them. And so you can go down the checklist and yes, we've got this, we have this, we have this. Oops, we're a little light on this one, or this is something that we want to pay attention to going forward. Sometimes towns, usually inadvertently, don't have a required element or a required map because there are required maps for a town plan. And so that can lead to your town plan not being approvable by the Regional Planning Commission. And it also is possible that if it doesn't have all the required elements, it could be grounds for an attorney to challenge it in an Act 250 proceeding, where the district commission might say, Weston says no aluminum smelters in the center of the village, but their plan is lacking some element or other, and therefore it's not a valid plan, and therefore the project doesn't have to comply. Okay.
That's great. And was this self-assessment, and maybe Annie, was this something that's been in existence for when this town plan was put together? Or is this something that's more modern?
I don't know. I really don't know. I just know the last time that the town plan was updated, uh, what I do recall was that the planning commission spent quite a bit of time, and I think probably with the assessment, et cetera. Later into the project, they submitted to the select board, which was a different select board, although I was on it at the time. And the select board had lots of questions and lots of feedback. And I guess frustrated the person that was heading up the plan, and he resigned. And I don't know whether then from there on, they just threw their arms up and just updated the plan or what they did. But in 2016, when it was when our last town plan that was approved came into effect. So
I suspect that the town plan self-assessment form was probably available then. Whether the town availed itself of it to any great extent, I don't know. I do know that the Wyndham Regional Commission has internally a town plan assessment form that staff working for the Planning Coordination Committee and the commission will go through a plan and check all the elements and consistency with the state's planning goals and so on. And it's essentially the same form. It has element 1, and do you have it? Element 2, land use plan. Do you have a map of existing land use and a map of proposed land use? And are the maps consistent with the language in the plan? And so that kind of a thing. So I'm sure that some such assessment was conducted for the current town plan because it did achieve regional commission review and approval. We'll get to those bit of weeds in a while, I think. But basically towns may have a plan. If they do have a plan, it has to have those required elements. And then if they have a plan, they may request regional commission review and approval of the plan. And then we have statutory requirements that we have to follow to review the plan and approve it if it meets those requirements. Sorry about the weeds, but they're deep
okay.
and they're copious.
John, would it make sense for us as a relatively new commission to get that self-assessment plan, review the existing plan and discuss it as a group?
It absolutely would. And I will actually make an asterisk in the margin and say, send TP self-assessment form. And I guess I'll send it to Annie, since I don't think I have all of your emails yet on one. So I will send a self-assessment form to Annie and she can distribute it as I share the workload.
Okay. I will obviously email you back and reply all type email, so you will have everybody's email
That would be wonderful.
as well, so we
I'd-
can do that.
I'd
Okay,
appreciate that. Yes, indeed. And that will lighten your load in the future.
and then I assume, considering if we're working with you, then you would work with us through that, and that there are probably two approach, either to go through the old plan and yay or nay, agree, disagree, or to just start from scratch with a blank form and say, or,
I will tell you that there is a tremendous amount of work involved in trying to create a town plan from scratch.
Yep.
I mean, it dwarfs what updating your current plan is. I think your current plan is in pretty good shape. So I would highly encourage the lesser workload of take a look at your current plan with the assessment form. I'm sure that it meets all the requirements, but you can also, as you're going through it, say, here's something we want to change, improve upon, or otherwise update. So that would be my advice.
Right, excellent.
Great.
Okay, next slide, as we're getting further along. So town plan adoption, plans expire every 8 years. You should revise or update it or whatever, or you can readopt the existing plan. There's a provision in statute for that. Though it does require you to update the data upon which the plan is based. So if there's new census data, for example, you need to do that. But you can readopt the current plan, long as it has all the essential elements. You also, there's a requirement to review and update the implementation program. Anyway, the adoption process can take several months. That's the adoption process. Once you have the plan successfully drafted, the adoption process itself can take pretty close to 2 months, if not more. Because the planning commission has to have a hearing before you can send the plan to the select board for them to have a hearing, and then they can vote to adopt it. So planning commission has to have a hearing, and you have to distribute the plan and a bunch of other stuff, which I'll be happy to go into at some point, to the neighboring towns and to the regional commission and to DHCD at least 30 days in advance of the planning commission hearing. So there's a month right there. Then the planning commission has their hearing and sends it on to the select board. And it used to be that they couldn't hold their hearing less than 30 days after the planning commission submitted the plan to them. I think that's gone down to 15 days, but still. And it takes a while. And then the select board has a hearing, then after their hearing, then they can vote to adopt the plan. Unless the select board or the voters have elected to decide by Australian ballot to adopt a plan. Only 1 or 2 towns in the region do that. And it makes things much more time involved, lengthier process at any rate. And then plans go into effect upon adoption. So many weeds, sorry. So regional commission approval of the plan and confirmation of the planning process. There are 2 parts here. And if folks are aware of it at all, it's usually about approval of the plan. And you may request our approval, review and approval of a plan. You don't have to. You have a plan adopted. It has standing in Act 250. It has standing in Section 248. But if you have an approved plan and a confirmed planning process, it gives you those benefits of eligibility for grants, and it can convey the substantial deference in Section 248. There's some deep weeds there because when we review a plan for approval, we have to have a hearing and consult with the town about the municipal planning process. If you have an enhanced energy plan and want to achieve what's called a determination of energy compliance, you can request that from the regional commission also. And we have to have a hearing. And guess what? It has to be a separate hearing from the one for review and approval of the plan. So we have to have 2 hearings if you're wanting to have review and approval of the plan and a determination of energy compliance. You guys tell me to back off on the weeds here when I get too deep into them, because there's just a lot there. So we have to approve a plan. We shall approve a plan if it's consistent with the state's planning goals. So all those 14 goals in 4302, and is compatible with the regional plan, and is compatible with the approved plans of other towns in the region and contains all the required elements specified in 4382. Then there's the confirmed planning process, which means that we shall confirm the municipal planning process if you're engaged in a continued planning process that will result in a plan that's consistent with the goals in 4302. You're engaged in a process to implement your plan, and you're maintaining your efforts to provide local funds for town and regional planning purposes. What's not listed in those bullets is you have to have an approved plan in order to give a confirmed planning process. So when we go through that process of review and approval of the plan and confirmation of the planning process, we have to have two separate votes, one to approve the plan, and then if the plan's approved, then one to confirm the planning process. More than you wanted to know. Okay, local roles and responsibilities. I think this is,
I'm sorry, John.
Yep.
I just want to go back. What is the benefit to the town of, I get you approve the plan, that makes perfect sense. What's the benefit behind the confirming the municipal planning process itself?
because that is actually the trigger point for eligibility to apply for grants like municipal planning grants. They don't say if you have an approved plan, they say if you have a confirmed planning process
Okay,
to be eligible. So that's
thank you.
that's the biggie. That's same thing for if you wanted to renew your village center designation, for example, because I believe you have a state designated village center. You can't renew that unless you have a confirmed municipal planning process. So those are a couple of reasons. And there's,
Could you illustrate something about a confirmed planning process? What do you mean by that?
well, basically, it means that the town is engaged in trying to implement your town plan. For example, updating your zoning so that it better implements the town plan. And that the town is providing local funds for the planning commission. So the planning commission has a budget, so that you can do things. And that you're engaged in a continuing planning process means that you are looking at your town and trying to plan for it. That's somewhat subject to interpretation, but having a town plan, working on a town plan, working on village center designation, working on the bike ped study around the village, or et cetera. All of these things would be considered evidence that you are engaged in a continuing planning process.
So
John?
in other words, it's
Yeah.
not a piece of paper, basically.
No, it's not a piece of paper. But it's a box on a piece of paper that we have to check.
Got it.
John,
Yeah.
since you just brought up the zoning regulations,
Yep,
rewriting, I believe it's our zoning regulations that need to be written more imminently than the town plan, although the town plan is also coming up quickly. I believe I asked you this, but I think needs a little more discussion on two things. Is it possible, or is there a way or advisable to try to work both of them in tandem, considering our timeframes? Number two, I thought I did read somewhere that, and you said there is a specific definition for statutory meaning to interim, but
oh yeah,
is it possible to, and we don't have to take this up now, I just wanted to put it out there because that's a big picture overall that I think we're faced with. Are there changes that we could, or minor adaptations, amendments to our existing zoning regs that could be while we are working on our town plan, we would like to implement the following minor changes to
Yep.
be formally adopted at a later
Yep.
date. Could you just,
I'll
would
be
that be
happy
helpful
to,
everybody to go into that a little bit? Because this is, we're a
I'll
little
be-
bit like this, I think.
I'll be happy to speak to those questions and whatever else that may arise as we consider them. So town plan and zoning at the same time. Yes, you can do that. No, there's no prohibition on that. But do bear in mind that you have to have a current valid town plan in order to be able to amend the zoning. So if you have a few short, minor things that you want to, you feel are very important to address before you dive deep into the town plan update, you certainly can do that. You can amend your zoning at any time. But I want to just reiterate, emphasize this strongly that it's really important to keep having a valid town plan so that you can amend zoning, because if your plan expires, then you can't amend zoning until such time as you actually adopt a plan, adopt a new plan. So yes, you can. I don't mean to sound belittling, but you can tinker with the zoning before you or while you are embarked upon updating the plan. But keep in mind that you really, really, really want to complete the town plan update and adoption process so that you maintain the ability to update the zoning more fulsomely when the time arises. And you don't want to be without a plan in case there's an Act 250 or a Section 248 or for example, a village designation, village center designation renewal looming. So there are a lot of reasons to place a high priority on having a town plan and completing the update and adoption process timely.
John?
Yep.
How long does the village designation last? Is that an
I
automatic renewal?
It is not automatic renewal. You have to apply for it. It used to be every 5 years. I think they extended it to 8 years. There is a list of designated village centers someplace on DHCD's website. You can check that out. They do notify towns 6 months before it's due to expire, but that's not actually all that much time. If you need to, for example, they've got requirements about what you have to say in the town plan in order to be eligible for approval of your redesignation or renewal of your designation. Very specific language saying describes how village center designation furthers the goals of the plan. So you have to have that sentence in there in your plan someplace that says that, or words to that effect. So that's a short answer.
John, you advised us earlier that doing a total rewrite on a town plan might be a monumental undertaking. Now, with regard to the zoning regs, I've heard two kind of contrary thoughts from people who are offering their opinions. One thought is we need to make specific quote unquote Band-Aid amendments to areas of concern, and other people say you should not do that, that you need a total global rewrite of the zoning regs. Could you offer a comment based on your experience on those two disparate ideas?
Yes, I'll be happy to. And we'll try to be careful and diplomatic also in my response. You can and probably should try to address things that are of great concern in the immediate term and short term. On the other end of the spectrum, a complete and utter rewrite of zoning is likely to be another monumental task, and you will need to hire consultants to help you. And I think Londonderry just did that to the tune of $22,000 or something. And then they hired a consultant to help them do that. And that took a year and a half or 2 years. I don't even know whether they have actually even adopted that update. We helped them write the municipal planning grant application that was funded for $22,000. But I don't know how they're faring with their adoption of the overhauled zoning, and I haven't even seen a copy of the overhauled zoning, so I can't tell you what it looks like. But I think that short term, you certainly can and probably should address some of the concerns. Now, here's where I'm going to try to wax diplomatic, and I will please beg your indulgence and your consideration here. But I tried to help Weston. I did help Weston apply for a municipal planning grant to update the zoning, but we didn't get much into the specifics. Unfortunately, Weston was among the 5 towns in the Wyndham region that didn't get funded for their municipal planning grant applications. Only 2 towns did, Brattleboro and Rockingham, because among other things, in the evaluation process for municipal planning grants, towns with designated downtowns get mega bonus points. And those 2 towns have designated downtowns. And their funding of those two grants exhausted the amount of municipal planning grant money that was available for the region. So you didn't get funded, and that was unfortunate, but a bunch of towns didn't. Anyway, I'm starting to wander too much here, so reel me back in. I guess that's a short answer. I would be cautious about undertaking a complete and utter overhaul of the zoning. Not that you shouldn't consider it, but it might be a monumental task, even more so than creating a new town plan. And if you have relatively decent current zoning and it needs to be tweaked a little bit, then I would encourage you to contemplate doing that. I saw a marked up copy of Weston zoning that had a lot of suggestions for changes, and some of them were pretty significant. And on an initial blush, and I kind of wish Will were here with us, because I don't want to be seen as speaking behind his back, but some of the changes that he seemed to be recommending were substantial and in fact flew in the face of statutory requirements regarding required elements of zoning or limitations on zoning. So that was one element that had me kind of concerned. Then there was suggestions about modifying the flood hazard area regulations. And those suggestions would probably fly in the face of the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program on what it is that a town zoning regulation has to do in order to qualify the town to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. So wonderful big picture thoughts and ideas. You want to be really careful about how you go about trying to implement them so that you remain consistent with Vermont statute, remain consistent with the requirements of NFIP.
Is
Way
it-
more than you wanted to know.
Is it possible too, though, possibly like hybrid vision, a hybrid version, in that some brainstorming, vision, etc. And then with that in mind, I think several things were pointed out in the grant application that were very much worthy of of
Consideration, yeah.
yes. Um, and that there are a few things that are very minor wording changes and small additions. I know, having done this in the past, and some of our inconsistencies right now are a result of doing one and not realizing how it was going to affect the next one. So
Yep.
I think if maybe you can help us work through this to do a hybrid version of the a combination of the two is what I envision that we really need to do. Because both, and because of the timing on both our town plan, we do obviously have an accepted, valid town plan that does need some work, but to try to mesh them to a certain degree,
Yep.
a certain degree. Am I bumbling? But that's the hybrid.
I'll be very happy to work with you on trying to address that concern or those concerns. But that also puts me in mind of something that I forgot to follow up on earlier, so let me just revert to that momentarily. Annie had mentioned interim zoning, and I had replied to her, be cautious in the use of that term because that has a very specific statutory meaning. What it means is that you can, the select board can adopt interim zoning, but it's only good for 2 years and then it expires unless it's further adopted. So just playing around with legal stuff, I've learned to pay careful attention to the words.
Yep.
And not only because I was an English teacher in a former lifetime, but because I've been working with towns for 20 years and watched them occasionally stub their toes if they're not careful about use of terms. So,
Okay.
sorry about that. Okay.
No, that's the, thank you for clarifying that, because I think that's important too.
Yep. All righty. Ready for the next slide? Holy smokes.
Okay.
Local roles and responsibilities. They're actually spelled out in statute. There's legislative, and in this case, what it means is writing and or adopting things. So planning commission writes a plan, select board adopts a plan. And then there's quasi judicial, which is the review and permit process. And then there's purely administrative, either issue or deny, and that's the zoning administrator. And the quasi judicial used to be planning commission and ZBA, now it's DRB. So that, at least in theory, frees the planning commission up to focus on the writing of things. So here's a little bit more detailed sort of flow chart. So legislative body is the select board, and that it's an unfortunate term of art that they use, the statute uses legislative body meaning select board, because it can also mean other things, but then it kind of confuses the issue pertaining to the legislative function, which is really, in this case, is referring to the planning commission in terms of its work to write town plans and write bylaws. And then there's the quasi judicial function, which is either a DRB or it's the ZBA and the planning commission. And I don't want to leave out the administrative function, which is a zoning administrator. Either issues a permit, denies it, or refers it to the board for quasi judicial action. So legislative functions. Planning commission prepares a town plan, prepares zoning and other land use regulations. It can prepare or edit a capital budget and program, though many select boards don't necessarily appreciate the planning commission sticking their nose into what select board thinks is their bailiwick. But some planning commissions and select boards get along well, and they do that well together. But I just, sorry, have to laugh every once in a while, or this stuff would drive you nuts. Or you can prepare all kinds of other studies, and this is spelled out under the powers of the planning commission in statute. The legislative body, the select board, they review and they can edit the town plan that you planning commission submit to them, and they can adopt it, or they can send it to voters for adoption. Sending it to the voters for adoption is a very complicated process because it involves meetings, votes at town meeting to vote to adopt the town plan by Australian ballot in the future. And then a second vote on that topic at a subsequent town meeting. And then that becomes the law of the land unless and until there's a subsequent vote to undo it. Anyway. So the
That is
default
how
is,
we've adopted them in the past. We have done town meeting and an Australian ballot adoption.
have you really?
Yeah,
I didn't think that Weston was one of the few towns in the region that did adopt by Australian ballot.
well, looking at our current zoning regulations on the cover, it says amended at town meeting March 3rd, 2015 by Australian ballot.
Oh, I'll be jiggered. Huh. I did not know that.
Can that be
We have to do it in the
changed?
future, I guess, but
Well,
Well,
I would, before I gave any kind of a definitive opinion on that, I would want to look into it a little bit more, but I'm relatively sure that, well, I was referring in this case to town plan. But, and I know in the case of town plans, that the default is the select board can adopt, is the one that adopts, unless there's
That's
a formal
correct.
vote to do it by Australian ballot. And I assume that the statute says the same thing about adopting zoning bylaws, but I'm not going to dive into those weeds now because I'd have to unshare the screen so I could get to the statute. I've only got one monitor, so I'm not going to try to
no,
go there.
no, not,
But I will make a note to look into that. Adoption of the zoning by Australian ballot.
the town plan was adopted by the select board on October 11th, 2016. That's written on. the town
exactly.
plan.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just the zoning that gets adopted by town meeting.
Huh.
And can
Zoning
that,
bylaws.
so you're
Right.
looking into that, but can that be changed by the select board? Or-
I think that if it's anything like town plan adoption by Australian ballot, which I am a little bit familiar with because Halifax does it that way. To get it to go to Australian ballot takes votes at town meeting to do so. And to undo it, I would think, I know for town plans, it takes another vote, series of votes, actually, by town meeting to do so. So I suspect it would be the same for zoning. I don't know. And I'll be a little careful here, but not everything, not everything that ends up printed on the covers of plans or zoning is actually completely accurate. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
There are an awful lot of people that don't pay as much attention to the pedantic semantics as I feel obliged to. Let me put it that way. So
We can find out with our clerk.
there you go. Absolutely. And
Okay.
I'll look into what the statute says
Yeah.
about that. Anyway, so select board can adopt and they can edit the town plan. You send the town plan to them and the select board can do what they want with it. If they change it in any substantive way, then they have to have another hearing on it, but they can do it. And the same thing with zoning. Planning commission can write something up that says do X, Y, and Z, and the select board can change it to do A, B, and C, and then vote to adopt it, unless it goes to the voters, in which case then the voters have a say. Anyway, and the select board prepares or edits and adopts the capital budget and program. And some select boards are very jealous of that power. Others, not so much. Quasi judicial function, and we don't really have to spend a lot of time on this because you now have a DRB, which is highly commendable. So the DRB reviews all this stuff. It used to be, before the legislature created DRBs, that there were a very specific list of things that planning commissions had to do: review site plans and subdivisions and lots without frontage. And the ZBA looked at conditional uses and variances and appeals. Now the DRB gets it all. The administrative function, the ZA issues zoning permits, conducts enforcement, assists applicants, and may or may not staff the DRB, the Planning Commission, or ZBA. And it is wildly different amongst all the towns as to whether the ZA provides support to those boards or not. Anyway, so bylaw or ordinance, what's the difference? They're essentially having similar impacts, but they're adopted and maybe enforced differently. Bylaws and zoning bylaws and subdivision and so on and so forth, regulatory tools, those are specified in statute, and they're adopted and enforced under Chapter 117. Then there are ordinances or rules adopted under Chapter 59, totally different thing. That's essentially the police powers of the town. And select board can adopt ordinances, and it's a very different process. To adopt something under Chapter 117, Planning Commission has to have a hearing, then it goes to select board and they have a hearing, and then either the select board votes to adopt or it goes to Australian ballot. Under Chapter 59, the select board can just adopt something. They don't have to have a public hearing or anything. They can just adopt something, and then if people don't like it, they can petition to reverse the vote. So I won't name names, but I've seen that happen to a well-intentioned town that was trying to adopt flood hazard area regulations. And instead of going Chapter 117 route, they went Chapter 59 route. Select board adopted it, and there was great hue and cry and petition, and it got overturned. So they got no flood hazard regs. So no flood insurance for you. So something to be aware of. Yeah.
John?
Yep.
So I just look at the clock and I know that you said that 8:30 was our total cutoff time.
Oh,
There was, and I was wondering if you could, before our time elapses,
yep.
talk to us a little bit about Vermont's open meeting law and also deliberative session. And partly it's, we're a new group and there's been some discussion about the commission, I mean, our panel getting together to get to know each other, not to conduct town business per se, but just talk about things in general.
Yep.
Could you give us some guidance in that regard?
I'll do my best. It's not something I've had a lot of practice with, but in terms of a planning commission doing it once there's a DRB. Deliberative sessions are provided for in statute for the quasi judicial panel to have a meeting that's exempt from open meeting law to deliberate upon a decision. I do not know that there's any applicable element of that to a planning commission meeting. I think that it's quite all right for planning commission to have a meeting. You have to post it if you're going to have a quorum of people. And I don't know about the element of considering town business. Annie and I went through that over this a little bit in preparation for this particular session this evening. And I think that resolution was sort of, this is a training session being put on by WRC and not something the planning commission is going to be conducting business. So not to worry too much. I guess my first response would be, I'm not sure who your town council is, but if there's a question about exemption from open meeting law for just a get together and meet each other and stuff, I don't think there is. So I would caution you on that front. I would say just post a meeting and have your meeting and watch lots of people not show up.
I know select board has, of course, we have the executive session to discuss personnel and real estate are two of the main
Yep. They're very specific
reasons, but
provisions.
they're very specific on those, and we have to cite
Yep,
the actual,
yep,
when we go in, we have to say, we can't just say executive session, we have to cite what very specifically, whether it's a personnel issue
Yep.
or a real
Yep.
estate,
Yep.
So it does, I don't know whether the PC has that.
I
unless-
don't, I just went through this with,
Yeah,
I just went through this issue about deliberative sessions not long ago with another large town in the region where the DRB was wanting to do deliberative sessions before they had even concluded their hearing. My underinformed read of the statute is that a deliberative session is for a board, a board exercising quasi judicial function to be able to talk about things in private. And they don't have to have notes. They don't have to have anything. They have to come out of the deliberative session and then have a public vote, but they don't have to reveal what's done in the deliberative session. But I had never contemplated trying to have one for a planning commission in its legislative function, if you will, in its just trying to do general planning work. So I don't know the answer to that. I'll take a look, but I would also, and this is one of the things where if there's a gray area, I'm a frequent repeater of the phrase, I am not an attorney. And I will give you my opinion, but that's only my opinion. It's not a legal opinion. And if you are concerned, I would encourage consulting town council, or at a minimum, VLCT could probably render an opinion.
Right.
Vermont League of Cities and Towns. So, and thank you for raising that, Lexi, about the end of the meeting. I don't know whether Zoom's going to cut us off at 8:30. That's just, I figured I would give us an hour and a half, even though there was discussion about not going over an hour. And obviously we're having so much fun. Next time I'll schedule 2.5 hours.
No.
Anyway, so I'm happy to pursue any questions you all have right now. I don't know that there's a great deal more implementing the plan. There's zoning and flood hazard regs and non-regulatory, doing stuff like your bike ped study and so on around the village center. Why have local land use regulations? You don't need to spend any time on that. Limits of local regulation. This is just worth 30 seconds. You can't deprive people of all reasonable use of their property. You can only regulate what's enabled in statute because it's a Dillon's rule state. And Chapter 117 has two very important sections, 4412, required provisions and prohibited effects, and limitations. And then, so players and processes involved and local regulations, what their purpose is, and decisions. And this is getting way into the weeds, and I'd rather spend our last little bit answering questions. I'm happy to keep scrolling through the slide deck, but I'd be overjoyed to have conversational gambits.
I think we did discuss a follow-up meeting where we can get
Yep.
more into the woods. I thought
Yep.
perhaps after this general overview and orientation, we could meet, discuss what we've gone over with, with you, and start maybe framing some of our ideas for process, and then meet with you again to start outlining more of the details, and maybe we'll have even more questions once
I
we've
would, I would,
digested this.
I
And
would suspect you would have many more questions, so, and I'd be overjoyed to engage and answer them and have another session with you.
I would like to, just for you to address a little bit
Yep.
the role, how can we use you? What's our role? The select board did allocate about $6,000 in this upcoming budget for the rewriting of, primarily for the rewriting of the zoning laws, which is primarily consulting fees or other administrative, whatever else we need to do. So could you just talk a little bit about the role that you might be able to play, and how you can help us, and how we might engage?
I'll
with
be
you?
happy to. I was just going to try to enlarge the pictures so I have a better look at you all. There a little bit better. So our role. So
I guess if you
John?
end the screen
Yep.
share,
End
end the
screen share,
share
right.
screen.
I'm happy to end the share screen if you'd like. I'm very happy to do that. Stop share. Boink.
There you go.
There we
Okay.
go.
Okay,
Much better. So, couple of things. One, WRC, we have, one of our primary, if not the primary mission, is to assist our towns. And so what I'm doing is providing assistance to the town this evening. We provide training and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, we don't have an unlimited budget. So, and we don't have an unlimited staff. So there are sort of limits on how much free help we can give, but we go quite far and try very hard to go as far as we possibly can. That having been said, I think more along the lines of what Annie was driving at was in actual work on the zoning update. And we are quite undoubtedly happy to try to work with the town, and quite likely to have sufficient staff bandwidth. We just hired a second planner to actually work on municipal planning and zoning and regional planning stuff. But we've been short-staffed for a while, and this is going to be a new person coming on. That having been said, we are also not territorial. If you could find a consultant or an attorney that would work with you on updating the zoning, we would not be offended if you chose to use them instead of us, but we would also be very pleased to work with you to negotiate a municipal services contract to work with you to work on the zoning update. As Londonderry found out, any major zoning work can be quite expensive and lengthy and time consuming. And so that not necessarily something you want to go huge on right now. Now, with a number of like $6,000, we can probably provide you. I don't have a calculator up at the moment, but our sort of going blended rate for staff to assist the town, what the number we put on that for the municipal planning grant applications was $85 an hour. That would be whether it's me or Jeff Nugent, our GIS map person working on updating maps, or some other staff person in the office, whether it might be Sue Westa or our newest planner coming on board. Anyway, the general blended rate for WRC assistance for municipal planning and zoning work at this point in time is $75. A year ago, it was $75. Now it's $85. So just for planning purposes, and we can get into the weeds about, you know, what you would like in terms of, you guys come up with ideas about what you want to accomplish. And one of us, we would meet with you probably virtually, since we aren't doing much in the way of in-person meetings, which, by the way, saves you a lot of unnecessary, I guess, expense for our travel time to get from Brattleboro to Weston. Not that I don't like to go there, but you know, that's time that isn't spent actually working on the project. So anyway, so we would be happy to have a number of meetings with you, review drafts or develop drafts for you to review, or some combination of the two. Does that answer your question, Annie?
Yes, I think it does. I think I had calculated somewhere around 70 hours. And again, once we get into, once we've had a chance to talk and come up with more questions, that maybe our next session, we'll have a better idea that we can kind
Yep.
of focus that to use
Yep.
the best of your talents. The thing is, this is now our be all end all. You know, how we can divvy up some of the research questions, et cetera, too.
Yep,
So,
yep. No, we'd be very happy to work with you. Don't want to max out on anything. I mean, I always like to try to leave a margin, because always unanticipated things come up.
yeah,
And as there was and will be no charge for this evening's festivities, there wouldn't be for the next meeting. I mean, we could meet several times before we actually get to the point of trying to do a municipal services contract.
Right.
At that point, then I or we have to really be careful that we don't go too far over. We always go over what we can bill. So
okay.
there will be a certain amount of pro bono, I guarantee it. But that's frowned upon by management.
So-
All right.
As we consider, because we're going to obviously talk more about this, I just want to kind of hear, because I'm walking away with a whole bunch of things. One of them being the notion of tweak versus redo. But I'm also looking at these dates. So the town plan was adopted on October 11th, 2016, and the village designation was adopted on April of 2016. So in both these cases, these hit the 6-year mark. In your estimation, is this when you really do begin this discussion, or are we 6 months away from that, a year away from that?
I would highly encourage you to begin considering the town plan update sooner rather than later, because among other things, we would be overjoyed to help you try to apply for a municipal planning grant so that you could hire us or some other consultant to help you work on a town plan. The next deadline for municipal planning grant applications is in the fall. It used to be the end of September. They moved it to end of October, but they generally render a decision in November, late November, early December, and those awards are good for a year and a half.
Okay.
So,
And that's this, and for the village designation, I'm just, because you brought that up and I was trying to find it online and I found it right here in the town plan document when it was adopted. It sounds like that's an important one to make sure we go through whatever process is necessary to ensure that we renew that as well.
yep, absolutely.
Okay.
I will, here's a dirty little secret that DHCD would kick me in the backside for saying, but they should notify the town at least 6 months before the expiration of the village center designation, to give you time to pull together the renewal application. If you don't make it in time, there's a 30-day grace period. So
So this is not a big, complicated one. This is an application you go through, you just simply reapply.
yeah, yeah. You
Okay.
can find the renewal guidance on DHCD's website, or I can send you a copy of it if I remember to.
Okay.
Go to Village Centers and they have application guidance page, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I see it right here, right next to the picture of the Vermont Country Store, which is kind of cool. So,
Wonderful.
Okay.
Yikes.
And same with zoning, if we did do an interim, we could do some minor amendments for this year. Have an interim, which would buy us 2 more years to then adapt.
Except you're not calling it interim.
Well, it would be, but it could be.
Well, it could be, but I'd prefer you use a term that didn't have a specific statutory definition. Temporary zoning amendment or something like, I mean, just,
But
sorry.
it would be legal that if we do make some, that those amendments or changes are legal and that it is understood that it is
A
in
placeholder.
the intermediate stage,
Yep,
maybe
yep.
intermediate. We
Yes,
use
I like that word much better. Yes.
intermediate, okay. Intermediate steps, okay. Because we've mentioned, and you've mentioned, there are several things that are out, that we are really out of whack as far as even compliance with what is acceptable, and that.
I didn't say any such thing. That you,
Okay, implied.
well, no, what I was trying to communicate was that some of the suggestions that I saw
That's, yeah.
were,
Okay,
were potentially problematic.
got it.
okay, good enough. I guess maybe we're getting a little specific to Weston, so we better, I think that's.
Yeah. All righty. Well, in case Zoom cuts us off, I don't know that they will, but I want to just make sure to say thank you all for joining the conversation. I think you've got a great planning commission going, and I look forward to working with you. And now I'm happy to continue talking, but I wanted to get that out in case Zoom cut us off.
Thanks, John.
All
Thank
right.
you so much
Yeah,
for
thank
your
you.
help today.
Yes,
it's a
that
pleasure.
was great. That was great. Thank you very much.
All right. I will look forward to engaging with you much more in the future.
We do
Likewise,
too.
All right.
likewise. Thanks, everybody.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks
Thank you.
all. Have a good evening.
You too.
You
Bye
too.
all.
All right. I'm gonna close it.
All right.
Bye now.
How do we get out of here?
And thank you, Annie, Ann Deegan, for your assistance in getting Annie in. Woo!
How do I get out?
All righty. I'll end it for you. Take care.